everyone. It's the time has arrived. We have been working on this for a number of weeks, months actually, and it's a very great pleasure to welcome all of you to this Strengthening Families Conference. This event comes after, as I mentioned, a lot of efforts, but a very nice and enjoyable partnership with Sutherland Institute. And I would like to recognize Rick Larsen here with us, President and CEO of the Sutherland Institute. We started last year this collaboration that started with simple webinars and then Family Values Award in Brussels. And then we thought, let's do a policy exchange in Salt Lake. And it's nice to see some of the people, Senator Weiler and Representative Pierucci, that were there last year, Jenet, that was representing the academia world at that policy exchange. And we had some people from Brussels and Europe going to Salt Lake. We have Lisa, Heidi, and Jose Luis is not here, but he will be joining us later today. So that first exchange was really inspiring, and we said we need to keep building on this. And so this year we started our second season. So we had already 2 webinars, again with academia and civil society, and we're looking next month to do our third webinar with legislators and policymakers. And we said, now let's do a policy exchange in Brussels too. And so here we are. So before I go further, let me just mention the usual housekeeping items. So it's free seating, you know. You can change seats during sessions. You can move around as you wish. But basically it's free seating. Speakers will always be here. However, you see microphones on each table, and that's on purpose because we really want our oh, here he is, Jose Luis, take a seat around the table. And we really want you to participate and engage with our speakers. We don't want just to hear from the speakers, which is great. They are knowledgeable experts, but they also want to hear from you. They also want to hear your perspective, your suggestions and recommendations. So let's start with the program. We are honored to begin with remarks from Antonella Sberna. She's the Vice President of the European Parliament, and she will share her insights through a video message. Many thanks to Vice President Sberna. I liked how she emphasized that family is not a theoretical idea, but is indeed a lived reality that needs to be nurtured and listened to. She also mentioned a few things, like why young people hesitate to marry or to start a new family, or the increased loneliness, the impact of new technologies on families. And these are all topics that we hope we will address during our different panels today. I will now move into the first panel without further ado. We're actually 4 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great. Before, again, I forgot a few. I'm bad with housekeeping items, but you will see in your folder this little notice. This event is being recorded, and we have a photographer taking pictures. If you would like not to be in pictures, please let him know, and I will make sure that you disappear from the pictures. Other than that, our speakers will have 10 minutes each for their first initial remarks. We have a killer down there. Alexa she's our timekeeper. She will show you 3 minutes mark, and then she will tell you when time is up. And again, I invite the audience to take notes and be ready to ask questions and have a very engaging discussion. So let's start with the first session. The first session addresses the academic perspective on family dynamics. We have 3 leading experts on the subject. Vincenzo Bassi from Italy, Jenet Erickson from the US, and Matteo Rizzolli from Rome. You will find their bios in your packet. They will look at the impact of economic instability, technology, and cultural shifts on family dynamics. And without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Bassi.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your effort because for us it's an occasion to have exchanges on issues which are not so easy analyzed by the doctrine, but also by the public opinion. And they are very usual, as you said, also to have exchange with you, because sometimes ideas come from exchanges. So everybody has a proper perspective coming from the education, the experience, and even the family. And having the opportunity to share this perspective with other perspectives is a real treasure, and we should spoil, let me say, this occasion. First of all, I would like to quote a very important phrase of Pope Francis when he wrote Laudato Si. He said that there is no sustainable development without intergenerational balance. What does it mean? That we need an intergenerational solidarity, and we cannot reach this essential goal without the families. During the last years, and I think it's true, we spent a long time just to find out the best definition of families. And it brought the public discussion to, let me say, a fight, because everybody could have a different idea of families. But if you look if you look at the reality, and if you look at the function of the institutions, in our case of the family, of course we can say that there is no doubt. I mean, the families exist because they have to serve, not because they have to defend something, or because they have to defend the power, or because, I mean, they have to serve. And as jurist, I can say, because for me it was something that I didn't read on my book. That's why these occasions are very important, because without the opportunity to share, I couldn't think about that. I said, which was the first agreement in the human life? So the first agreement which introduced the humankind to the civilization. It was my question. I asked myself these questions because everybody in this world, in this consumerism world, everybody thinks about sales, bargain. I am a business lawyer, so I understand all these words, all these dynamic. But if we look at our common tradition, even religious, but not only religious, so I studied the Bible, I studied Tito Livius, I studied the Metamorphosis of Ovidio, and we see that there was just the first and after is the family. So the first juridical agreement is the family, is the marriage. Because it's the first one, and it's very interesting because it's an agreement, it's not a contract. So, for example, in Latin, also in Italian, sometimes it's difficult to translate. In Latin, we have negotium, to say the general category, and then you have a contract, because contract has a patrimonial content, okay? The negotium is something more general, because the marriage is the only agreement which has been stipulated for the interest of the other. So I didn't get married because of my interest, because otherwise it was easier to have a cooperative, an institution with mutual goals, okay? Or I could have an insurance. Maybe sometimes in this epoch it's also really cheaper, okay? But I would like to get married for the interest of my wife And for my wife, it was the same. The both interests created this family. And I'm talking about the juridical point of view. After that, I have the responsibility, and the responsibility is a source of law. So that's why the marriage is the first juridical act, and all the other juridical acts, including contracts, were made in the interest of the family itself. And looking at this perspective, what we can see, and what we can say, also in, let me say, in the economic point of view, is that we are living in a consumerist epoch. So the consumerism seems to be the only driver. But it's not true. I mean, it's a question of just a historical situation, it's historical circumstances. So we can see something more, something higher than what we are living in this moment. And we can understand the pivotal role of the family. And it's very interesting because if you look at this perspective, you can see that now we really account the richness just as a consequence of the circulation of the money. So for us, the economical value is linked to the monetary richness. But we know very much that you can have economical value, so Jenet, well-being, also without money. And the family, the people who live the family know very well this experience, because you can live well without having money. I don't say that the money are not important, but they are, in any case, the most important thing is the well-being within the family. And it's very interesting because if you look at the word economy, it comes from Old Greek. And it means the management of the family. Because oikia is home, no house, home, or family as well. And nomos is management. So everything recalls the family. And also when we talk about families, we talk about consumers. This is another mistake. Because if I look at my family background, I think that, okay, I consume when I buy food, but normally I do investments in human capitals. And if we are able, this is, I think, our challenge, if we are able to use, not to make a revolution, to use the categories taught in the beginning referring to the families, and we reuse them, just speaking about the family, and not only the social, but even the economical role in terms of growth, I think that we can present the family not as the sick, but the care of the sick. And this is, I think, our role. Because I don't feel ignorant, or I don't feel no part of this world because I have a family, because I have 3 children. I think only that that my attention to the families can concur to the common goods. And it is still happening while we are speaking, but somebody of us does not recognize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincenzo.
10 minutes. Scusa, devo fare una telefonata, mi si fermo.
Now let's give the floor to Professor Erickson.
Wonderful. Matteo and I talked about standing up. I hope that that's okay. Should I take the mic? with that, or
I think it's
it'll be okay?
linked to.
Great, we'll pick up. I'm just going to start. It's wonderful to be here and to have had the privilege last fall to meet together. I was so hopeful that we could continue these dialogues because I know we care across the world about the same issues. The same issues that she referenced, the Vice President referenced, are important for all of us, and to work together to find solutions. So from a United States perspective, I just wanted to start by giving just an overview of what we are concerned about right now. What are the striking things that we have dealt with? And I think to appreciate, when I started working on PhD work, there was no question that we were grappling with that issue of family structure. Today we'll be focusing on economic stability and technology and cultural shifts in regard to the family. But when I started PhD work, we were 2 generations into that disruption of family structure, meaning the divorce rate had increased over the 1970s and 1980s to nearly half of all marriages. And we were dealing with the implications of that. It's shifted in the sense that we actually have an increased percentage of children growing up in the United States within a 2-parent household than we have in the past. And there does seem to be a more widespread public recognition that, in the words of a recent author, Melissa Kearney, out of University of Maryland, this book was a very important message, but confirming that the privilege for children is coming from a 2-parent household. It is the driving factor in the class division in the United States. It is, in a sense, the trajectory setter for a child is whether or not they have a 2-parent family, married 2 parents. Now, having said that, our biggest issue that we are facing now is the decline in the marriage rate that she referenced, the Vice President, earlier this morning, the delay of marriage, and our own fertility crisis. At just last week, 1.6 is where the United States is for low replacement. And with it, there's a sense that marriageability of men and women has decreased. No longer is it older ages, but just their capacity to form healthy marriages has diminished. And part of that is that we'll be addressing later as well, I think, is there's an increased division in our Gen Z and younger generations between men and women. They see themselves as in opposition, in a sense, to one another. This is new, I think, in the United States. So just some quick slides. This just will illustrate the retreat from marriage in the United States, the decreased rate, and you can just see that drop-off, rather steep decline in the most recent decade. This will show the age of first marriage and how that has dramatically increased over the past decade as well. And so what that means is you have many more people by age 40 who have never married. So 1 in 4 men in the United States have never married by age 40. The important piece with that is that it's also different across classes. So we really do have a very remarkable separation in terms of marriage rates based on whether or not people are educated, college educated, or working class. And so this will just illustrate that some of our working class families and certain races have a much higher rate of not marrying than others. In fact, in a recent piece that I was just working on, in some ways, marriage has now become the elite institution. And
The elite institution.
the elite institution.
Okay.
It is those who are educated, those who are religious, that are experiencing the benefits of marriage. This just captures what she referenced, I think, in the introductory piece, which is just to show that marriage, this is not just part of the United States story, but that the rate of marriage is decreasing internationally and the age of marriage has dramatically increased across the world. And the biggest factor in fertility itself is, as you would guess, marriage. It's women not having children in their 20s, essentially, that is the big factor in decreased fertility across the world, including the United States. So that's why we have this recognition of the fall of fertility internationally. This would just map internationally, but this is capturing the United States versus the rest of the world. Now, along with that, in the United States especially, what we've seen, as referenced I think by you, Vincenzo, is a decrease in just the prioritization of marriage. So So within the last year, we had a survey that found that 9 in 10 parents prioritize their children having strong financial careers, but only 1 in 5 felt the same importance of their children marrying and having children. Now we'll talk about why that matters. Nearly half said this is not important at all. That's not just for parents. This will capture what's going on for young adults themselves, who would say much less likely to identify marriage as important, much more likely to say work and money are extremely important. So we recently, Derek Thompson in the last few years has written in The Atlantic about this workist versus familist orientation. And that among the educated especially, there's a sense that career is the source of identity. Career is the source of meaning and purpose. And so the idea is that everything should sort of cater to my finding my identity through my career, as opposed to a flip, where work used to be how I provided for family, with family being the orientation of human life. So just quickly, I want to just capture what's going on across both genders in the United States. And really what we might say is that we see among young women an increased anxiety, and among young men, a floundering. So men are, in the words of Jonathan Haidt, retreating from the real world. They're less likely to be engaged in work, in effort in school, in the things that would orient them to becoming the kind of people who would be marriageable. So we're seeing a much stronger increase in the percentage of men who are neither working nor becoming educated, and hence they are not marriageable to women. So we recognize in dating apps that 20%, 80% of women are looking at 20% of men as marriageable. And so you have this really significant gap between women who are achieving, more women own homes, more women working, and we see men floundering, especially among our working class men, which is a strong factor in the decreased marriageability, the decreased marriage rate. This just captures the issue of pornography itself. It's still a little bit taboo, Heidi, as you know, to get at this. But I think more and more, even Jonathan Haidt, who would write the book Anxious Generation, recently would say, who wouldn't see himself as religious, would say this is a huge issue in the withdrawal of men from the real world. Because what happens is life on games and pornography are taking away from their involvement in the world. This will the new surge that's going to be represented will be AI companions, not something we've talked about very much, but there's obviously a dramatic uptick just in the last few months in people searching and using AI companions, which I'll highlight in just a minute. This is going to capture the issue of depression and anxiety among women as we move from men to women. Boys are also increasing in depression and anxiety, but smartphones and media use meant there was a dramatic uptick internationally in mental health struggles among young women and young men, with women much higher there. Women are also in the United States becoming less religious, less inclined towards the institution of religion and marriage and family. We see a growing political divide, especially since the new administration in the United States, between men and women identifying as liberal, men identifying as conservative, and an increasing political divide that makes them unable, in a sense, to connect that way. So all of these are part of the story of economic changes, technological changes, and cultural changes. Men are less marriageable because we've lost so many manufacturing jobs. That had a dramatic effect on the marriageability of men because they can't access work, especially among our working class men. And they don't have access to the institutions that would help them become work-able men because there's not access to that. The other piece is the technology revolution. So that would be the economic story going on. This would be the technology story going on. And I think we've had each 15 years, we've had a wave that is literally like a tsunami in terms of its implications on cultural health and well-being. So here would be the internet, this would be smartphones and AI, which I think many of us would say that will have stronger implications than we have yet known, even based on these previous two. So the story of the cultural changes is, of course, our decline in religion, the breaking of marriage from sexual relations and children, marriage being moved from being seen as a cornerstone of life to being an inaccessible capstone, something that after I've obtained all kinds of things, then I will choose to marry, as opposed to building one's life on marriage. The digital revolution, and then I think as she referenced, we just don't have generational scripts to help us as parents and as a culture know how to handle these changes. We can't look to the generations before us to know how to handle technology in the development of children, for example. So we can talk through a little bit more what we're trying to do educationally, what we're trying to do in terms of policy to address these issues. But hopefully you can see that it's a combination of technological, economic, and educational pieces there. Thank you. Yes, yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Erickson.
Thank you.
Now we give the floor to Professor Rizzolli.
Thank you.
So thank you. I'm also sending my initial words to thank you for this invitation. It's great that I can share some thoughts with you. Given the limited amount of time I have, I will present you, introduce you to some radical ideas. Maybe that some issues will raise, and I hope there's time to address them later. So so when we talk about family policies, what do we have in mind? I mean, family policies are many, but mostly we think about tax policies, so transfers to family, for children, for spouses. We also think about public services like childcare, and of course there's all the issues of labor laws and also corporate organization that accommodates family life. These are the three main topics. There are many others, but these are the three big issues. So what do they have in common? To me, the commonality of these family policies is that the goal of trying to make having a child cheap, right? Just to reduce the marginal cost of having children. That's the common goal of these policies. Well, do they work? Well, first, let me say that also, I mean, the way countries deal with these policies is very different. Countries might be more the tax way, like France, or more like the childcare way, like Scandinavian countries, and so on. So every country has its mix of policies, and some countries like Italy has a little, scores very low on each one of them. The point is that whatever mix of policies you can think of, apparently these days they seem to not be working. That's a sad news. So I know that the fertility rate is just one metric with which you can measure family strength and family thriving, but it's certainly an important metric, so let me use that. Here is a picture of Italy, and we go, I mean, this has been going worse since 2022. Italy is now below 1.2. The post-child of family policies, which is Hungary, which is always brought as an example of what you should do in terms of family policies, has now gone below 1.4 this year. And we have seen the fertility rates in the US as well. So it seems like the traditional 1.0 approach to family policy, decreasing the marginal cost of having children, is not, I mean, it works on the margin. So putting a lot of money in the tax system like France do, you can go from 1.5, which is the average European fertility rate, to 1.7 or less than 1.7, which means that you postpone your extinction by a couple of hundred years down in the future. But I mean, it's not bad, but that's the... Anyway, so that's the state of affairs. I know it's not really easy to begin in the morning with this. Finally, the world seems to be realizing that this is the case. And I mean, there was this one on this piece on the Wall Street Journal a few months ago that was really making the case that it seems that nothing works, nothing that we are traditionally trying to do seems to make any difference. So, ideas. Well, I looked for ideas in a paper written in 1986 by demographer Paul Demeny that has been recently passed away. In 1986, when everybody was thinking about the population bomb, he would write a paper titled Pronatalist Policies in Low Fertility Countries. Okay, so he was just 40 years ahead of his time, and he was already seeing that probably the economic approach of lowering the marginal cost of the children would have not worked. And he instead focused on, he made three bold proposals, which I'm gonna tell you a little bit about, just food for thought. But anyway, so what I really would remark about this approach is that it changes the approach. It's not about making children cheaper, is about making the families more valuable. So, what are these three bold ideas? The first one, which since then has taken the name, his name, so it's now known as Demeny voting, is basically the idea that everybody, including children, including newborn, have a political right to vote. Of course, they cannot exercise it themselves until some age, which might be adult age, but it could be even earlier than that. But that right should be exercised by the parents. And this has, very intuitive. First, if we are serious about enfranchising, as we have been with enfranchising minorities and enfranchising women, the last big part of the population who is not yet enfranchised are children. And in countries like India, it means that 40% of the population basically has a basic right, political representation, which is not. So that's the first motivation. But the big motivation is an economic motivation. Another motivation is the economic one. And of course, there's a famous theorem should I raise the voice? Yes. Famous theorem is the median voter theorem in economics that says that basically rational politicians do what the median voter theorem wants. Okay, so that explains. Traditionally this has been used to explain the right versus left politics. But it can be used to explain the older versus younger policies. Okay, so if you by enfranchising children, you lower the average age of the population, politicians will react by providing policies which are more favorable to children, more favorable to families. There is already some evidence that this works. This works also in terms of age, not only in terms of right versus young. So that was the first bold idea of Demeny. Second bold idea was that children are understood in economics as public goods. What does it mean? It means that they provide benefits to everybody in terms of the fact that they will become the working population who will pay for the pensions of everybody, including those who didn't have children. But the costs of providing this good are private. Okay, so there is a clear incentive to free ride, and this can be prevented to some extent, or at least managed to some extent, by linking the pension to fertility, to the fertility choices. I think that there's an economic issue here, but also a very symbolic, important issue. It shows to society what are the benefits for everybody of having children. that everybody benefits from the children which are paid for by private costs of their parents. Final bold idea. There was a fourth one. The fourth one was about education and using vouchers for education. But I think that idea kind of passed through. So basically, so let me focus on this. So the idea. So we have seen before that marriage is so fundamental. But why is it so fundamental? Why is marriage so important to creating to families and to fertility rates? Well, I mean, marriage is a commitment that nowadays is becoming more and more symbolic. We are emptying its legal meaning by divorce laws and by other meanings. This emptying of marriage makes the willingness to commit into the relation less there's less opportunity to really commit to the yes, I'm just finishing, to the union and to make the investments necessary to build families, to raise children together. So how do you reinforce the marriage? Except, I mean, you can go through the law, but I mean, and go back on the many laws that have kind of weakened the marriage law. But also, I mean, you could also strengthen the family by incorporating the family. What does it mean? It means that, I mean, as much as we treat firms as legal entities that protect the assets of the firm against all others creditors, so we should do with the family. The family, I mean, there's not only, I mean, the house is not the only asset that the family owns. There are the salaries, there are all sorts of incomes that could be put into incorporated into the family, and that would also strengthen the family and the capacity of the spouses to invest and make specific investments, like having children into the family. Okay, so these were the three bold ideas, and hope we have time to discuss them later.
Bravo.
I mean, despite some of the concerning information that was shared, you all made us a service with your comments. I particularly liked Dr. Bassi's depiction of the family, the explanation of the family as the first judicial agreement, and how every other agreement is made in the should be made. I would say should be made in the interest of the family.
Was made and should be made.
And should be made. I appreciated Professor Jenet Erickson overview of the trends, of the current trends, which should inform us on how to better tackle those issues. And Professor Rizzolli's sharing Professor Demini proposals, which are very new to me, honestly, and I would say almost revolutionary to what I have heard so far.
I told you so.
And so I think we have received a lot of food for thought, and now time is yours to engage with our panelists with your questions.
Matteo, you had mentioned with the first bold idea, the voting, the children in enfranchisement. Could you say this is working somewhere? Has this been attempted and succeeded?
So it has been tried, but a very long time ago. It has been tried. So actually, I mean, we call it the Meni, but we should call it Rosmini voting, because Rosmini was this Catholic thinker of the mid-19th century. He also wrote like the constitutions for the French Republic, but anyway, so Belgium adopted. So in his proposal for the constitution, he had the head of the family voting. Remember that at that time, the point was that, I mean, only the male rich people were voting, so he made a big step forward by proposing that the vote should be made universal, even if to male, but also the male would represent all the votes of the components of the family. And this was implemented here in Belgium for 2 rounds of the elections in the 1870s. But then, of course, this conflicted with the legitimate movement of, that claimed the voting rights for women. And eventually, it was abandoned. So it could have gone otherwise. It could have gone like letting the women vote, but also letting the children voting as well. So, but what I also refer to, so we don't have any modern example of this working, but there are. There is empirical evidence from the U.S. that in the last 20 years, some states have approved law to facilitate pre-registration of voting, to make it easier. If I understand correctly, you have to pre-register to actually show up in at the polls on the day of the elections, right? So, like when you are young, for the first time you vote. Does that how it works? Yes. Okay. So, but this pre-registration is relatively difficult. So you have to go to a special office. It's not that you can go the day of the election. So some states made it easier to do this, to do so by basically allowing people to do that when they take the driving license and so on. So this had a very small effect of increasing the population of young voters who would vote in those states. And these people, these economists, found a causal effect on the approval of this law onto the expenses in education in those states. So politicians acted rationally, even if that was marginally a very small change in the law, but politicians understood that in those states there would have been a larger percentage of younger people going out and voting, and they reacted by spending more on education. So it's not bulletproof of the many voting, because actually the many voting hasn't been tried everywhere, anywhere. So there are some associations like in Italy that want to introduce them as, but this would be private organizations trying to implement it. But so far, no big country or municipality have tried that.
Yeah, Candace. Is this on? Okay. Thank you, Representative Perucci from Utah. And these were radical ideas. And I was excited because I ran the school choice bill, which is at its core a voucher bill, which you saved it so I get to talk about it when I'm up. But I am intrigued by this idea of incorporation. So are you saying that similar to like a 501c3 or a corporation in America, you would get the same tax write-offs for that family? Is that what you mean by that? Or are you like you treat it like a business? I think
Vincenzo can answer that, because we have been discussing that like 10 years ago.
Let's hear it.
He was. He has always said that. Family should be treated like a
family is an enterprise, because there is no enterprise without organization, professional skills, and the capacity of management. I mean, as a lawyer, as a jurist, I can tell you that if I see something like that carried out in continuity, we say that there is we have an enterprise. The difference between the commercial enterprise and the family is that the service and goods carried out within the family are not for the market. The only difference. But this is something that has been added after, because the family is the enterprise, and every enterprise are a prototype. The family is for every enterprise a prototype of enterprise. There is still some legal rules could not be translated in normal rules of law, like bonus pater familias. It's just an example, because we are talking about a virtue that you can understand only if you live in a family. So when we say that the family is the proto-enterprise, is the first enterprise, it's true. And that's why, I mean, it's not a joke, but I know Matteo, so we know each other, so I don't want, but I also understand that the economical words. But for example, when he says about the compensation, the children, the tax system should compensate, I think that we should speak about the justice. We are not talking about privilege. That's not a privilege, because a privilege is a derogation of the equality principle. We must speak about justice. And at least a just tax system can provide awards. It makes differences. It's not just a lexical, difference. It's something more interesting, because, if you have a privilege, you cannot interpret the law in analogy with other rule of law. This is a typical way of interpreting the laws. But if you are talking about a justice, for example, you can also apply some rules applied to the enterprise. Now we can do that not for a lack of political view, because of lack of juridical thought. And so we cannot transfer all the responsibilities only on politicians. It's also a question of researcher, university. We should understand well the role of the family. After that, this is maybe what we did not do in the academic environment. Because for us, if we look, for example, I am a jurist, but I study quite a lot economy. And even if I take some very important liberal thinker, if I look at the liberal thought, I can say that the family was considered for granted. And every study departed, and maybe the parts from the market. But who built up the market? Who?
Family.
The families, the community of families. This is the reality. So, if I look, I say, because my perspective, Matteo has how many children? 7. I have 3, so
Just 6.
If I do comparison, he's a real expert. But as I am also president of the Catholic Family Organization in Europe. From the perspective of the family, what I can say, especially during the pandemic time, that the worst sickness of the families was not the lack of money or lack of job, which is a huge problem for a family, but the loneliness. So now we need to have good family policies considered as investments, not as a social cost. And it's up to us and to you as politicians to make clear that there is no confusion among family and demographic policies and social policies. This is the first difference, and if I want, I can write pages and pages of legal opinion on that, on one side. But we need also to take on more responsibility from our side, because we need to recreate family networks. Because as you said about religious, I can translate. By saying families living in communities, they don't feel alone, and their birth rate also among our members is higher. So if I look Südtirol in Europe, my member of my organization, they live not in the city but in the landscape, okay, in the countryside, and they are a real community, okay. They have an average more than 2.3 children per woman, and if we look some parishes, even in Rome, I can tell you when the parish is very focused on families, they have more children, family networks. The families themselves have more children. So now, even in a liberal point of view, we need to recreate, to help people to recreate family networks. Then all the system will be more independent from the state. So we must claim only justice from the state. And this is what maybe also the enterprises will ask. I like you. I thank you very much, because it means it is not something that we look at from our side. It's something that comes from the reality. Please, let's speak in this way, because it's, I think, very interesting to develop this perspective.
But yeah, just to make it, I mean, the example we discussed a long time ago was exactly a very simple one. But I mean, buying a van, like I have a large family, as Vincenzo has revealed, so I need to buy a van. Is that a consumption, or is that an investment? Because I mean, I need the van to bring the children to school, to the swimming pool, to do their activities, so they will be better citizens, more productive citizens, so they will pay more pensions to all those my fellows who don't have. So is that an investment, or is it consumption? So I mean, the tax question is exactly
The auto industry
on
would
point.
love it. Well.
Also the interest rate, because now if you buy a Ferrari and if you buy a van, I can guarantee you it's the same interest rate.
Yeah.
But in enterprise, buying a car, the interest rate is lower. This is the experience as normal citizens.
It's a fascinating concept.
So we cannot do a bridge loan to buy home. An enterprise, yes. This is my experience as a father. So this is, I think, the real point. The mosaic, all the woke culture is just a consequence of lack of awareness concerning the function of the family. Because if you look at the function of the family, the woke is just a joke. It's just a joke. But the point is, we thought that we could substitute the family. This is the point. And our effort is to show that it's not possible. It's just ideology.
Thank you. I just would like to, Matteo, you brought me a nightmare back. You know, buying a van is actually a terrible experience in Europe. There are so very few models that we could choose, and very expensive ones. By the way,
I wanted so much Chrysler Pacifica, but there's no such a thing.
No way to get
No, it's no way.
I just wanted to steal a moment, take advantage of my role to ask a question to Professor Erickson. As a father of 3 boys, your mentioning of the decline in marriageability, rings a worrying bell. So my question to you is which policies do you see that could help mitigate that decline, and when to start?
Yeah.
When addressing policies that address children or address them at teenage years, and what kind of policies do you think would be effective?
Yeah. I think what we're looking at in the United States is a multi-pronged effort, a cultural, a technological, and educational, as you referenced. And so when we see Jonathan Haidt's work, for example, Anxious Generation, where he's the one who's coined that term, men are withdrawing from the world, he gives really specific directions to families and schools. So we now have this rising movement of removing phones from schools bell to bell in the United States, which hasn't happened before. But within the last 6 months, there's a strong energy towards protecting children from technology use for a longer period of time. So he will specify for families, age 16, you don't introduce social media to girls until age 16. Strong restrictions on exposure to gaming for boys younger. And I think from the policy lens, protecting children from exposure to illicit content, so pornography, and putting responsibility on the tech companies more so to provide restrictions that way, recognizing parents cannot handle this. They cannot do this all on their own. It will take efforts from the policy lens, from the policy world, protecting children. But I think I think what we're looking at with boys is even more complex than just policy, because there's obviously an interest in the United States in increasing the likelihood that men can access, working class men in particular, can access work and provide for families, because they just are not marriageable. And they aren't able to add something to the family without having work opportunities. So it's an educational vein of increasing the likelihood that men can do professions without a college degree that allow them to provide. It's the technology side, which is families and government policies that help restrict technological access to help strengthen parents in that way. And then it's just cultural awareness of what's going on in the developing mind of young men and young women, and how that's limiting their development so significantly. Does that get at that question?
It does.
It's a complex question, I think, but we certainly need help, right? We need to be doing more to help our young men.
Thank you. I think I saw Lisa's hands going up before, or?
It was just a comment on the van example, because this is something I've brought up specifically in my country in terms of family policies. Is we have in our country 150% tax, reduced only a few years ago from 180% tax on cars. And this is implemented in many ways because we don't want rich people to have very rich cars. But it impacts the family in a very specific way. And I know from many families who will say that, well, we didn't get the third or the fourth because that would require a significant economic investment in a different vehicle. And so it might be a small, simple thing, but it actually does have a quite a big impact on whether or not families who do want children choose to have an additional one. So I think it's an important one, even though it's simple.
I think, Jose?
Well, thank you, and I have difficulties to reach with such a vast information that you open so many avenues for discussion. So when I see these transatlantic dialogues, I see the difference between Europe and the US in many senses. We have, let's say, the failure, or I don't know, the add value to be a little bit more conceptual sometimes, and you're a little bit more pragmatical, but I see that right now, all this information is absolutely valuable, but I think that we have different layers when it comes to the problems. The more visible is the policy. Then we have the culture, and then we have the civilizational, which is the deepest one. I think that we are not in a time of change of culture. We are in a moment of change of civilization. Because the basis of a civilization is the model of man. So when Lenin made the revolution, he wanted a new man. The French wanted a new man, even a new time. They have a new calendar. So everyone has calendar, the time, space, and a new model of man. Now we have a very different model of man, and then we have a different model of family society. I want just to bring the point of the question of the role of the state as well. Because family is considered just a sociological entity. It exists, it exists, so okay, fine, we can do something with it. I think that we have to upgrade. In 1983, the Vatican, the Holy See, launched this very famous Charter of the Rights of the Family. I think that it was an attempt just to have a different relation with the state. Here in Europe, it's not only a matter of taxation, because we have this principle in the US law of no taxation without, well, it actually was English, no taxation without representation. So it seems that it was one of the core principles about the relation between state and individual. But I think that we have to go beyond that. It's not only a matter of money, it's just a matter of what is the family for the state. It's just a tax entity to collect, it's a consumer entity. Is it a little more? We have the question, for example, in my country in Spain, but in many other countries, and here in Belgium as well, who is the owner of the children? The children belong to whom? And this is very core, for example, when it comes to education. So in some countries like Yemen, you know that homeschooling is banned, so you cannot decide. I'm here traveling in troubles with my Catholic school, because they implemented a new subject, EVRAS, which is the education for I don't know how is sexual, and there's another word there. Relationship education, which is very tricky. But I mean, as soon as they're 8, 9 years old, they start teaching sex and not biology, but sexual behavior. It's different. So my point here is just a question of the state and how we can change not only that relation, but as well how can we bring back the understanding of human being as a relational person, not as an individual, because in my view, the whole problem comes of the understanding of a man as an individual that has a certain relation with the state. Children do not have direct relation with the state. But I think that that's the point that we have to think also how to go beyond. We have to implement policies, but we have to go beyond, even in terms of language, because the whole battle came from a different cultural mindset, a different language, and as soon as you bring a language, you bring the reality behind.
Thank you. Representative Pierucci.
Thank you. Sorry, second bite of the apple here. For Professor Erickson, again, my oldest is a boy, and I found that when I was purchasing books for him as a toddler, and my little girl, I have books like She Persisted and on every famous American woman, and it is easy when I go to the library to find books on women for her, and I feel like we actually overcorrected in going from like the era of not finding anything about women to now it's all you can find, and even watching movies like Luca is the only show most recently that has a male lead that is an antagonist. And so as a 90s child, I grew up with the princesses saving themselves, and I benefited from that, right? But how do we have a cultural revolution where we get back to where you can have a positive story about a male lead and where young boys can see themselves in a character? I guess that's my frustration, is I find myself reading books on George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. My kid sounds like he's 30 talking about the founding fathers because those are the stories that I can find. And so I guess I know it seems smaller and a symptom of the problem, but what's been the coolest and most interesting thing as I've been here in Brussels is all the American icons here. I've seen Rihanna and Beyonce and J-Lo more here than anything else. And so it's like, how do you get this change in culture to change that? Because I think that's part of why boys are floundering, is they're not seeing themselves in our culture.
Yeah. Just to comment quickly, and it would be interesting to hear perspectives from around the world around this, but we have Richard Reeves, who's done work on men, he'll say they're falling out the bottom, and the sense that men are not needed was an implication of the shift in professional work for women, so the dramatic increase in the workforce of women, which he would say strongly, we don't want to go back to the 1950s, but just meant there was a strong messaging for men that you are not needed. You're not needed economically. When you had this rupture of sex from marriage, then the pathway for men to become marriageable was disrupted. You don't have men needing to become a provider, needing to grow up in order to access sexual intimacy with someone who's committed to them. Because in the 1950s, if you'd wanted to have sex with someone, she would say, you need to be marriageable before I will have sex with you because I risk pregnancy. And that pathway has been disrupted for men completely. It's why Mark Regnerus will call cheap sex the challenge among the floundering of men, because they can access sexual relationships so easily, and it's not being channeled into development. So I think there's multiple pieces to that. I think the argument is, so Richard Reeves will say, if we have a culture where women are earning more than men, does that mean men are going to have to shift? And he would say this, men are going to have to shift in seeing themselves as valuable in a different way than they have in the past. Maybe not being the person that's economically provided for, but learning how to see themselves as valuable as a father, as a person involved in connected ways in home life. And we don't have a heritage of strong models that way, of men as provisioners, in a sense, within the home, as well as providers in a way that's looking more balanced. Now, I could say, I don't think women are going back to not working professionally. I don't think we're not going to shift back that direction. And so we have to find a way to talk about fertility for women that is not compromising of the sense of access to opportunities, while also building the sense of men being critical to family life, essential in family life, and also as providers, though not the only provider. And I don't know that we've yet figured out how to do that. And it's very challenging. I think it's a challenging, and maybe there's some more questions around. We do have to figure this thing out. We do have to figure out, does it mean men shifting in what the models are of what a cool man looks like than we've had in the past? Does it mean restrictions on access to technology because men are being literally sucked? It's got to be a multi-pronged approach to address men engaging more in the world, but also seeing themselves as needed, addressing the sexual piece as important, and then the work piece, being able to become marriageable, accessing work opportunities so they can provide, but also seeing themselves not as an exclusive provider. And that, I don't think we've gotten there yet. Did you have a comment about that? Okay.
It was actually a different question, but I'm just nodding like, I don't know, it's so interesting, and I really agree with you guys. Can I ask a question? Would that be okay?
Please.
Okay. And thank you so much for the remarks. I completely agree with you, Candice, that we have this cultural problem that boys, they see, and men, they see in public culture, they see a lot of, just normal men being pictured as stupid and not being capable of performing in their lives. And they see it so much. I mean, whenever you open up a new movie or series, they're just like, oh no, I can't stand it. Can we just watch something from the 90s, or because they're so sick of being portrayed like as if they are not able to live normal lives, and it's so heavy. So it's really becoming a burden. So we've been shifting in the wrong direction right now. But what I'm actually also focusing on is school. In Denmark, we just had a new look into the gaps of grades. And this is a question for both Professor Erickson and Professor Rizzolli. Do you see the same thing in your countries, that you have a gender gap in grades? In Denmark, it has actually doubled throughout the last 10 years, the gap in grades. And you can very clearly see why this is happening, because it can be tracked down to the introduction of 21st century skills and the progressive teaching methods and exams that have been integrated in the educational system throughout the last 20 years. So if you focus more on communication and more on pupil projects, shared group projects, cross-topic work, all these things, then the girls will thrive more, and the gender gap will increase. So the boys, they do better in natural science, they do better in exams where they have to just pick a question and answer. They do better in that. But if they have to gather in a group doing something cross-topic work, then the girls will prevail. And the gap is becoming so big now that when we have a new reform, which is being entered in 2030, we will see that that boys will fall behind just entering high school in a large amount, like really serious amount. And we know how to prevent that, but we cannot find a majority of politicians who will actually change this. So there is no willingness. We know what's going on. We know why it's going on, but there is no willingness to change it.
Well, I think the crisis.
The same thing?
I think it's remarkable that boys internationally have fallen behind girls in terms of, it's not just Denmark, probably U.S. So they're a year behind girls in the United States in terms of linguistic capacity and all of those capacities. It's clear that what's going on in our education system is we have mostly women teachers. And so there's been some desire to encourage men to become teachers so that boys have models of teachers, particularly not only in the sciences but in the arts and literature, and especially in that middle school, high school age, to have men to whom they can model their lives. But I think all of these things, the way we're testing, the way we're teaching, the curriculum, it has been oriented in a feminine way, and men are clearly, boys are falling behind internationally. So we've got to, I think there's an awakening in the United States to that. I think what's interesting is the challenge in the class gap around it. So you have, at the core, I think, all of these issues are part of it. But at the core, we have a growing percentage in that working class group who don't grow up in a household where they see a father who is a provider, who models manhood. And so there's no question that across the 70s and the 80s, where you had the increase in the divorce revolution, you had a dramatic increase in the number of boys who grew up without a father to look to. And that's the bigger piece, even more than the educational pieces, I think, is seeing a father interacting with a father, at least among our working class men, growing up with a father.
Professor Rizzolli, do you want to add to the question?
Yeah, I don't have much to add
There is also
to the answer. Just it's not my specific field, but certainly, in Italy we see the gap too. Maybe not in such dramatic terms, but it's there. And so, from what I've read, it's among the explanations and among the small things that can be done without. There's, for instance, this idea of. It is true that the way we built the school has been really fitting for girls and not for male, and we are leaving the male behind. And the small adjustments that could be done, that's what I've been reading about, were to actually postpone the entrance of male by 1 year. It seems like girls have this year advantage around the age of 6, and so and the competition starts already there, and they fall behind ever since. So just retarding this could have some effects, and there's some empirical evidence that those who enter schools 1 year later actually perform better comparatively. And another one is to do much more project-oriented teaching, because if there is one thing, as you said, boys are very good when you give them a task to do, when you give them a project, they get excited, they get, and then that's not what I've read. Boys are also good at bonding and working in teams, like they do in sports. So if they do projects together, they thrive. It's like when you have them sitting there learning and being disciplined, that's where girls outsmart and outstand the boys. So yeah, there might be. Anyway, so I'm not the expert here, so I should shut up.
But as a father, you are an expert.
You are an expert.
Thank you. I think I saw a hand going over there.
And also there.
And
two.
So which are the two ends?
Okay.
One is Ivan.
And another is Rich.
No.
Okay.
So Ivan, go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Ivan. I have like a question on how do you navigate the following? So, yeah, because there's a lot about navigation here. There are waves all over the place, no matter where you go.
Like it.
So we have a society where, of course, and I fully agree with that, the rights of women have had to be empowered, to not be oppressed. Okay? Now, the way it has been done, as you've been saying in different ways, that men has been being made less and less and less and less worthy, or be seen as less worthy. And then we have that the economical situation is that both father and mother, is not that the mother wants to work or not. Of course, if the mother wants to work, they should have as much right as anybody else to work on their professional life. But this has resulted, in my view, the children, they not only lack the model of the father at home, but also the model of the mother. Because father and mother, they are both outside working. They arrive at 8 o'clock at night for dinner. When the children, they are there, so they go dinner and go to bed because tomorrow you need to go to school. So children are being left without a mother and without a father. So basically, at the end, mother and father are working their life to feed children that they don't see and they are not being able to raise because they need to keep working to be able to pay the rent, the mortgage, the food, and the schools. How do we navigate this? Do you have any comments, experiences, thoughts about this?
One thing I think is important to recognize about women is when we look at women's preferences, and we just gathered some data with the Institute for Family Studies about the well-being of women, and counter to the cultural narrative, mothers with children are 10 percentage points more likely to be happy than women without children, women who are married without children, women who are with children but not married. So the happiest women are women who are married with children. They're healthier, they actually have less stress, they have less depression, they are more connected to their communities. There's just a whole broad sense of flourishing for women in that situation. But that's not the cultural narrative that you hear. The other cultural narrative that you don't hear is how many women, I think for decades we've seen there's a chunk of women, maybe 15%, who would want to work professionally regardless. There's a chunk, another 15% who would like to be at home regardless. And then there's a big percentage in the middle, a very large percentage in the middle, who want to be able to prioritize the care of young children when they are young in particular. So even if they are educated, when they are married, their preference is part-time or no employment. Huge percentages of women prefer part-time or no employment when their children are young. And so our gap is that many more women are working far more hours than they would like to be than are not accessing work. And so those who are married to a provider, who we would say have the greatest amount of choice, would prefer to prioritize the care of children. So I think what we see is the ideal seems to be what we might call a neo-traditional model, which is traditional but also new in that it's women, when children are young, prioritizing the care of young children, men prioritizing providing, but there's more sharing across that than we might have seen in 50 years ago, for example. I think if we're really clear about what women actually desire and want, they want marriage, they want children, they want to be able to prioritize the care of children when they're young. And so having men be marriageable is advantageous for women, tremendously.
Yeah, this perspective works if you can be committed into a long-term covenant that really, nobody walks away from that. That's the point of, that's why weakening marriage was so devastating, and that's why, this crazy idea of incorporating goes in the opposite direction. The policy of providing legal or institutional instruments to the couple to commit to each other, to this building a we that stays together forever, or this covenant that allows also the spouse to say, okay, I take a few years off, I look after the children, I'm not afraid that after that I will
be abandoned.
Or that my career, okay, maybe my career will be hit, but who cares? I will be thriving as a we, not as an I. That is what is lacking, and what we have been weakening, where we have to work on.
Restore the relational understanding of human beings.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you. It was just interesting for me to hear you talk about this, what women want, because we recently had a study come out in Denmark that highlighted that in Denmark this is actually the case. We have a lot of free choice because of our much family support and things, and most women, many women choose to work part-time. And this is the reality in Denmark right now, but this was problematized highly politically from even our prime minister, and recently a book came out.
Shaming women.
Definitely shaming women, and it was from the perspective of there's a recent book from a financial professor who wrote a book titled, how do we even translate it, Underskudskvinder, which is women are economic deficits. They don't. They're not
from the system.
Yes, they're sucking from the system where males, they provide. They are the plus in society. And it was a big debate because my perspective is, why is it a problem if the women are happy with the choice and the men are happy with the choice? And usually, typically, normally, a man and a woman together have children, and so it's a family enterprise. But even in a country like ours, and you said some very interesting things, and I'll talk more about it in my own presentation about Denmark. But we have in many ways a very family-friendly system. And I have seen many expats coming to Denmark who are excited because family life is so easy for them in our country. But so we have these things, but we have a different problem still existing with this cultural approach, because even when women are free to choose this, it's problematized heavily. And so women who choose it are still being pushed and feeling, oh, is it defensible? Is it, oh, actually, am I right, okay for wanting these things? And so it's not, when we talk about family policy, I think it's important to as you mentioned earlier, systems and financial support, it will not do anything if it stands alone. It has to be aware of the culture that it is resting upon. And so even in Denmark, when we have so many benefits for families, and we're free to choose in many ways, it's a highly ideological debate, and many women feel terrible for wanting these.
It's not really a choice.
No,
right?
it's not.
The stigma around it.
Yeah, and it comes with great sacrifice. I'm a mother of 5, and I'm one who dropped out of college, and I'm a underskudskvinde. I'm a deficit for the state, and I've chosen to do that freely, willingly in a marriage covenant. Yeah. But I also see very specifically around me that I was able to do so because I have marriage privilege, and not all women have that. They have to constantly balance between being dependent on a state or being dependent on a person who is not actually leaning into that marriage covenant fully. So it's a serious cultural problem, even in countries, in the Nordic countries, where we have very high levels of family support.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, it's going to be a long day, and we want to be sure that you get the 15-minute breaks between sessions. But I just want to close on that message that Professor Rizzolli mentioned, which was reinforced by all of our speakers. We can talk about policies, we can talk about how to empower couples to thrive. However, it goes back to the long-term relationships. It can't work if those unions, if those relationships, if those marriages are not strong and last. So I think that's another thought to consider as we go through our discussions today. But I would like to again thank our speakers today for the first session.